to your or our second panel at this fascinating conference. It's very nice that we have 2 hours for this panel, but only 3 speakers. So I already asked them that feel free to extend a bit if you wish, but I will in the end stop you latest after 25 minutes. On the other hand, I have to apologize that my designation as chair came rather late. Therefore, I asked the speakers to introduce themselves. I would say I will stick to the original program. So we will start with Renata, then to Andrea, and then to Petra. And we will have a discussion all together in the end. On the other hand, I have to remind all of us that we have simultaneous translation, and therefore please be slow. So I already said you don't have to stick to the 15 minutes and maybe choose that you speak a bit slower, that the interpreters have no problem. Sve u redu, dobro. Okay, so we will start with a fascinating paper on Croatian women on the home front between visual archives, historiography, and cultural memories. So, Renata, the floor is yours. Can I stand up? Speak wherever you like.
First of all, I would like to greet all of you. So I'm coming from the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Research from Zagreb. I'm associate of the Department for Oral Literature, and the area of my study is women history of 20th century, women's autobiographical texts, memoirs, particularly memoirs of women political prisoners from socialist period. I have a book about women cultural memories also. So for this particular occasion, I prepared only a few hypotheses that will be hopefully developed in a study at the end of my research on women and the First World War in Croatia from the perspective of feminist historiography. So why is feminist historical and cultural analysis relevant for exploring archival sources, historical processes, and collective imaginaries related to the cultural heritage of the Great War? I have fully embraced assumption by Joan Wallach Scott that, I quote, gender is constitutive element of social relationships and primary way of signifying relationships of power. Together with other feminist historians and scholars in gender and cultural studies, I'm convinced that, I quote, domestic is political and political is always gendered. That gender is analytically productive, leading us not only to an understanding of relations between men and women, but to a deeper analysis of how social and institutional transformations occur. It is a quote by Gall and Klingman book. Thus, my interest as ethnologist and feminist scholar is not focused on female activities or women's organizations during the First World War. It is rather focused on a crucial role of gendered images, concepts, and values in mobilizing, preparing, and then rehabilitating and reproducing the human material of the first modern total war. So gendered logic of normalization or symbolic gratification was often used to welcome glorious violence of defenders or to condemn barbaric violence of the enemy. It became a generator of the war propaganda machine, of stigmatizing the inner and outer enemy with pathological characteristics, such as weakness, femininity, or aggression, and of attaching religious symbolism to victimhood and moral values of warring parties. So, while the old world, with its pillars of identification, was falling apart, the symbolic representation of basic institutions within the realm of empire, in our case the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like families, schools, the state, churches, and the news media, insisted on patriarchal norms and stable gender division of labor, duties, and values, that thus confirming not only the position of women as subordinated to men, but also cementing the hierarchy of classes, nations, and sexes. The interpenetration of desirable social and gender order established a set of values that predefine roles for people within politically unstable monarchy and justify violent action as righteous and honorable behavior in the wartime. Just because a state at war makes free use of every injustice, every act of violence that would dishonor the individual, as Freud commented in his essay Reflections on War and Death, cultural re-inscriptions of honor, patriotism, loyalty, and self-sacrifice into such violent agency were so important. I'm going now to the second part of my presentation, which aim is to point out three possible approaches within the cultural feminist analysis. First will be feminist and gender-sensitive interpretation of the existing archival, particularly visual materials, like magazines, newspapers, particularly women's magazines, posters, postcards, and similar materials. Second, I will point out the importance of looking for new materials and cultural texts related to women's and family history. And the third, I will point out importance of interpreting culture memories, including literature, film, visual art, as a result of an ongoing culture processes and mediated memory transfer. As we will observe on a few illustrations chosen from the wartime propaganda, with the help of idealized and sublime quality of femininity and masculinity, defining the private and the public domain, or better to say the front line and the home front, monarch expert in public relations wanted to win the sympathy of the Croatian population and to help them to orient themselves in military matters. So the functions of the war propaganda representation of militarized men and women will be, first, to represent its military and empire, military and administrative rule as apostolic and sacred. Second, to celebrate the royal family as a role model of family life, promoting social and supranational unity and intimacy. Third, to galvanize monarchy subjects with Austrian patriotism and unconditional loyalty to Habsburg dynasty. Then, to reinforce a sense of Catholicism in conflict with Serb Orthodoxy. Then, to activate a sense of alliances, religious tolerance, and cultural proximity with former enemies, such as Ottoman Turks. And finally, perhaps, to push unbearable conditions of war into feminized zone of disorder, poverty, moral corruption, and fatal destiny. So on the one hand, there is symbolic transformation of mighty, paternal, imperialist, repressive empire into patronizing and maternal homeland, and on the other, the reaffirmation or reinvestment of celestial aura and divine political legitimacy into Austrian imperial crown and its actual sovereigns. First Franz Joseph, and then Karl Franz Joseph Ludwig, or Charles I of Austria with his wife Zita, represented as ideal apostolic rulers. The actual beatification of the deposed king by the Catholic Church happened in 2004, so that the Karl Franz Joseph Ludwig has become known actually as Blessed Charles of Austria. So the legitimation of the empire rule as given, celestial and historically unchanging, was suggested and offered in commodified form by royal heraldry, decorations, medals, plaques and badges, but also by living pictures or tableaux vivants. Just me find for you one of such. So it is one example of living pictures or tableaux vivants from Makarska. So living pictures were particularly popular art form since they offered monumental and theatrical presentation of the royal past as fixed, noble, and authoritative. They also supported hierarchical or pyramidal structure of society, filling ordinary citizens and even pupils, like on the next picture, with filling citizens with pathos, honor, and pride. As this popular royalist art from the 19th century descended into lower strata of society, to the streets and in schools, women and teachers became its main propagator and performers. So it is one representation of the royal pyramid that makes connections with Catholic pictures, and it is made for women actually, that women can embroider some parts of the picture. On the other side, the ugly and brutal face of war reality, together with its restrictions on food supply, famine, mass death, war orphans, infectious diseases, and moral corruption, was most often illustrated by subverted gender order and misogynistic representations of women as irresponsible, unfaithful, or frivolous, or, as in this picture, as allegory of death and political anarchy, or also as a representation of moral corruption in society. The second type of my visual materials contains photographs taken by Croatian officers at the different front lines, from Galicia to Jerusalem. The significant number of them represent an officer accompanied by local women. Better to say, he usually put his arms around women in something that should be a hug. If the title is given to the picture by the author or by the editor in the news magazine, it occasionally says, "Cheerful scene from the front line, moments of relaxation and fun." So the lascivious or explicit sexual connotation of those photographs, I will show you more ones. So there are two of women on each side of the officer Lipovchak. There are some pictures from the private album of from Hubert Petan, who is the grandfather of my colleague ethnologist from Galicia. So lascivious or explicit sexual connotation of those photographs might be interpreted as a special variant of semi-colonial military discourse in which the right to territorial control and the right to acquire new knowledge on the empire's subjects and territories was performed by patronizing tactics of invader, protector, missionary, and folksy guest, all represented in one person, the officer. In order to mask the obvious disparity of power and the ambivalent borderline position of the territory belonging to the enemy, but inhabited by friendly Slavic people, such as Ruthenians or Ukrainians, or the Slavic people in Bessarabia or Furlania, Croatian officers displayed their encounters with women as friendly companionships aimed at mutual satisfaction and pleasure. The newspaper's comments about those friendly and cheerful encounters are full of stereotypes about the Slavic hospitality and Croatian generosity towards the weak and poor village people devastated by war destruction. None of them problematized the power position of military personnel, their sexually permissive behavior, or the anxiety typical for the contact zone with the new or animal territory, full of, I quote one author, full of perils of margins and thresholds in a world of terrifying ambiguities. So the psychological cleft between hostility toward military men and sympathy for the women and children in war zone is even greater in the case of the officers who participated in the battlefields in Serbia and Montenegro. Of course, there is no mention of violence against civilians or sexual violence. On the contrary, in the manner typical for imperialistic colonial mentality, Croatian officers offered not only ethnographic pictures of exoticized people, but the whole range of Enlightenment fantasies about the benefits of authentic, unspoiled life in remote Albanian villages and about incorruptibility of their inhabitants, completely isolated from civilization. As Anne McClintock pointed out, imperial visual scenes are often document of paranoia and megalomania. They most often testify about the crisis and split in male identity between, I quote, a fantasy on conquest and dread of engulfment, between rape and emasculation. Namely, paranoia related to the social problem of women's infidelity on the home front concealed the ethical unacceptability of double standards of prescribed behavior for women and men, not only during the wartime, and the legitimacy of first feminist demands for gender equality. Photographs taken by Croatian officers, as those from the albums by Hubert Petan, demonstrate the popularity and mass use of new photographic technology in the front line, thus confirming it as, I quote, as a technology of possession, promising that those with capacity to make such perfect representation must have the right to territorial control. End of quote. Let me just quickly refer to the importance of looking for new archival materials and cultural texts relating women's and family history. After having been disappointed with the archival institutions I visited, which do not have a single manuscript of female war memoirs or diaries, I mean from Croatian, written by Croatian women or nurse, not to mention published books, the recent retrospective exhibition of Croatian painter Nasta Rojc has brought me more than surprise. Nasta Rojc left her unpublished autobiography entitled Shadow, Lights and Darkness from 1918 in manuscript. The manuscript contains many new and valuable insights about women's intellectual gaze and feminist interpretation of war events and circumstances. In any case, this text is a golden mine for a feminist research and comparison with much more famous war diaries of Miroslav Krleža or Ivan Meštrović. Because Nasta was an educated cosmopolitan woman and painter with a range of international contacts and an unusual love story. Namely, Nasta's life partner was Alexandrine Onslow, the decorated member of the Scottish Women's Hospital, serving on the Russian and on the Thessaloniki front line. However, this brave ambulance driver spent her last 3 decades in Zagreb in complete anonymity. Thanks to Professor of Art Leonida Kovac, I got a glimpse of just a small part of the legacy of Alexandrine Onslow, the world traveler, passionate photographer, sailor, and skipper. So my next task will be to see how to access and look into the metal case containing the secret legacy of Miss Onslow, owned by Croatian, but the best characterization will be eccentric art collector. The other, much more difficult task is to negotiate with the heirs of Nasta's husband, Milan Šenoa, in order to get permission to read and eventually publish Nasta's autobiography containing compromising details about her unacceptable sexual orientation and partnership. So, I'm going to the conclusion. The First World War had not only radically changed political and symbolic geography of Europe, encouraged the new movements for the rights of women, union workers, small nations, and colonized people, which finally destroyed the old Europe and Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it marked the beginning of a new era of mass culture and mass consumption, popular prints, posters, postcards, and films. Those new cultural forms of the mediation of war, imperialism, and humanitarian commodity were widespread in the far reaches of the empire. They were initiators of the new memory gestures and commemorative rituals, even during the war, in which the royal symbols, noble chivalrous culture intervened with religious rituals, petit bourgeois pathos, and anonymity of mass death. As Michael Howard nicely formulated in his book War in European History, with the First World War, nation became the center of public loyalty. It provided target, color, excitement, and a sense of self-esteem to people who have already outgrown the century of marvels and haven't yet entered the age of mass culture. The visual representations are an important part of historical inquiry and cultural inquiry, as they reveal the permanent work on collective imagination of the nation, because they have capacity to articulate invisible and traumatic experiences. Visual representations, together with the public acts of remembrance, memorials, and filmic representation, have far-reaching impact on historical knowledge and new memorial imagery of an increasingly globalized public. As one contemporary historian, feminist historian, Anne Rigney says, with the help of various media and memorial forms, later generations recall things other people experienced, and do so from the conviction that those past experiences have something to do with the sense of our history. So, my last sentence, I wholeheartedly hope that the three-part novel Taboo by Sibila Petlevsky, published just recently, will be filmed or otherwise made closer to a wider audience as it discovers an all-new universe of cultural fantasies, fears, and frustrations that most distinguished intellectuals like Victor Tausk, Marta Taus, Anto Grebo, or Anita Augsburg experience during the First World War, trying to adjust their talent, medical, scholarly, or political activities with conquering and assimilating politics of empire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for your fascinating and very interesting paper. I already have a lot of questions for the discussion, so very inspiring to think of the role of women, which was so different how it was before 1914. And I would like not only to thank you, but I don't want to forget also to thank the interpreters for their good job. And I would say we have a clap now, because in the end I'm sure I will forget it, so thank you very much. So, and the floor is yours, and don't forget to introduce you first.
First of all, I would like to greet you all. Like you already heard, my name is Andrea Baotic, and I come from Faculty of Philosophy in Sarajevo, where I work as Senior Teaching and Research Assistant. And most of my research actually focuses on sculpture in Bosnia and Herzegovina during Austro-Hungarian rule. Before I start, I must say that my paper will be in Bosnian, so I hope it won't be a problem for most of you. My PowerPoint presentation is bilingual, so I hope you will be able to follow it. Dakle, kao što možete vidjeti na naslovu, ono o čemu ću ja govoriti danas tiče se komemorativnih praksi u Bosni i Hercegovini nakon 1914. godine, odnosno jednog segmenta koji se tiče dizanja spomenika, i to carskih i ovih ratnih spomenika. Ono što ću pokušati pokazati je da ti spomenici, osim što su trebali sjećati na žrtve atentata i samoga rata, su zapravo svojom vizualnom formom trebali afirmirati povezanost lojalnog stanovništva sa carskom kućom, barem su tako naručitelji željeli. I da bi se uopšte shvatila ova promjena u komemorativnoj praksi gradnje spomenika nakon 1914. godine, potrebno je osvrnuti se na razdoblje koje je naime prethodilo. Naime, u duboko orijentaliziranoj zemlji, kakva je bila Bosna i Hercegovina, koja su u sastavu Austro-Ugarske monarhije počela otvarati zapadu i osvajati stečevine europskog civilizacijskog kruga, gradnja spomenika je u ovom okupacionom razdoblju bila isključivo u rukama režima, te zbog političke obazrivosti rezultirala malobrojnim i prilično skromnim ostvarenjima. Ova figuralna spomenička plastika, koja je u evropskim gradovima krajem 19. i početkom 20. stoljeća doživjela procvat, u spomenutom razdoblju gotovo potpuno je izostala u Bosni i Hercegovini. Prema nekim tumačenjima, spomenici sa figuralnom plastikom nisu podizani na javnom prostoru kako ne bi izazvali neprijatne reakcije kod domaćeg stanovništva, napose pod navodnicima muslimana i pravoslavaca kojima je vjera branila pravljenje rezanih i livenih likova. Dakle, u nastojanju da vlastitu politiku ne dovede u pitanje i da ne naruši odnose među pojedinim nacionalnim skupinama, odnosno konfesionalnim skupinama, Austro-Ugarska je uprava zaustavljala i otežavala čak i one inicijative koje su poticale od domaćeg stanovništva, a koje su se odnosile na podizanje građanskih spomenika znamenitim književnicima. Takav je primjerice bio slučaj s inicijativom oko gradnje spomenika Simi Milutinoviću, potom Ivanu Franu Jukiću u Banja Luci 1893. godine, protiv koje je bio i sam ministar zajedničkih financija Benjamin von Kalaj. Ovo njegovo protivljenje proizašlo iz konteksta politike takozvanog bošnjaštva kojom se nastojala izbjeći bilo kakva dezintegrativna nacionalna ideologija, a koja je svakako mogla biti ojačana komemoriranjem narodnih prosvjetitelja. Ovim Kalevim nastojanjima da se učvrsti položaj Austro-Ugarske uprave u okupiranim pokrajinama daleko je usklađenija bila politika podizanja vojnih spomenika i onih obilježja koja veličaju događaje vezane za kuću Habsburgovaca. U Bosni i Hercegovini su tako isprva komemorirane austrijske trupe i vojnici koji su nastradali prilikom okupacije 1878. godine, a evo kao što ovdje možete vidjeti podizani su im spomenici u gradovima diljem Bosne i Hercegovine. Dakle, riječ je o memorijalima koji su pretežno imali piramidalni oblik, odnosno formu obeliska ili pilona, a najreprezentativniji je bio podignut na preslici kraj Doboja. I kada već govorimo o ovim spomenicima u formi obeliska, treba još spomenuti i spomenik koji je podignut u Bosanskom Brodu 1887. godine. Dakle, riječ je o obelisku sa dvostrukim orlom na vrhu te komemorativnom pločom na postoju spomenika koji je imao za cilj sjećati na trenutak kada je car Franjo Josip 1885. godine po prvi put kročio na bosansko-hercegovačko tlo. I kako je sam putopisac Heinrich Renner primijetio, spomenik je sjećao još na dva događaja, dakle prodor Eugena Savojskog, isto tako prelazak barona Filipovića preko Save 1878. godine, dakle prilikom okupacije. Sasvim jasno da je ovaj spomenik postavljen na graničnom prijelazu u Bosnu služio kao demarkacija imperijalnog teritorija, onog koji će tek 2 decenije kasnije zvanično biti anektiran. I evo još u kontekstu spomenika koji su podignuti u Bosni i Hercegovini prije 1914. godine treba još spomenuti zanimljiv spomenik hrvatskim velikanima koji je podignut krajem 90. godina 19. stoljeća. Zanimljivo je dakle da su njegovi ugradnju inicirali katolici i okružni predstojnik Bihaća kako bi isti spomenik sjećao na plemiće iz 16. stoljeća čije su nadgrobne ploče otkrivene u Fethija džamiji 1894. godine. Zajedničko ministarstvo financija se njegovom podizanju nije usprotivilo, čak štaviše finansiralo ga je, pošto su ministar Kalaj kao i povjesničar Lajos Štaloci smatrali da spomenik ima politički značaj jer sjeća na borbu koju su sudjelovale hrvatske, mađarske i austrijske trupe prilikom odbrane Bihaća od Osmanlija. A u ovom kontekstu 19. stoljeća mogao bi spomenik služiti kao simbol zajedničke borbe tadašnjih naroda Austro-Ugarske. Vjerovatno iz tih razloga je za vizualno rješenje spomenika usvojen nacrt Karla Paržika, jednog od najznačajnijih arhitekata za samu Sarajevo u ovom razdoblju, koji je spomenik oblikovao u klasicističkom, da kažemo, stilu. Klasicizmu kao stilu koji je često primjenjivan kada su se željeli iskazati univerzalne, odnosno nadnacionalne vrijednosti, a kao što možete vidjeti on je danas u potpunosti ruiniran i gotovo ništa od svog prvotnog izgleda nema. Dakle, kada sad već govorimo o prijelomu, dakle, 1914. godini, nakon atentata nad vojvodu Franca Ferdinanda i suprugu mu Sofiju, spomenici u Bosni i Hercegovini dobili su nešto širu primjenu i drugačiju formu. Kako bi žrtve rata bile komemorirane, prvenstveno prijestolonasljednici, a onda i poginuli vojnici koji su se tokom rata borili za cara i domovinu, kotarski uredi i klerikalni krugovi u zemlji su pokretali inicijative za podizanje spomenika na čijoj izvedbi će raditi strani skulptori i arhitekti. Zahvaljujući njima i njihovim realizacijama, spomenici se više ne pojavljuju u dotadašnjoj formi obeliska, nego imaju figuralnu plastiku i to u nadnaravnoj veličini. Među prvim takvima bile su statue cara Franje Josipa koje su podignute u Sanskom mostu 1915. i u Livnu 1916. godine, obje uoči careva rođendana. Kako nas onodobna periodika izvještava, njihovo podizanje su inicirale gradske uprave, a njihovoj realizaciji su doprinijeli građani i seljani neovisno o vjeri i naciji, dakle pod navodnicima, koji su tim činom iskazivali zahvalnost, odanost i povezanost s vladarom, opet pod navodnicima, pod čijim žezlom je njihova zemlja doživjela progres. Sudeći prema retorici koja je pratila svečano otkrivanje spomenika, ovi kipovi trebali su biti dokaz ljubavi pod navodnicima, živi dokaz ljubavi naroda koji je dužan saprati sa sebe ljagu koju je na njega bacila ruka kletog zločina, njegovog odroda. Zatvoreni navodnici, te sjećati na čete koje su se u carevo ime borile i ginule na frontu. Da bi ovi spomenici bili što reprezentativniji, za njihovu izradu je angažiran bečki kipar Teodor Marija Kun, koji je u prijestolnici monarhije već bio poznat po čitavom nizu skulpturalnih dijela. Nabava spomenika, dakle, u Sanskom mostu i u Livnu, on je prikazao cara u nadnaravnoj veličini, u stojećem položaju i generalskoj odori sa otvorenim kaputom. U formalno-stilskom pogledu ovi carski spomenici bili su istovjetni onima koji su još i ranije postavljeni u Beču i u drugim austrijskim gradovima kada se slavila 50-godišnjica vladavine Franje Josipa. Upravo Kuen je izradio careve statue i kloster Neuburgu i Bad Voslau, koje su gotovo identične primjerima iz Bosne i Hercegovine. Kako historičar umjetnosti Werner Telesko primijetio, ove careve spomenike odlikuje strogoća, panegirička svečana jednostavnost, koja prije svega treba da naglasi vezu cara sa vojskom. Naravno, za sredinu kakava je Beč, ove statue su mogle izgledati jednostavno i nepretenciozno, no u sredini kakva je bila Bosna i Hercegovina, dvometarski kipovi monarha na jednako visokim postoljima su zacijelo izgledali impresivno, te su na eksplicitan način demonstrirali imperijalno prisustvo vladara. Među imperijalnim spomenicima koji su iskazivali lojalnost vladarskoj kući i žal za atentatom, značajno mjesto zauzima memorijal podignut u sjećanje na ubijene Franca Ferdinanda i Sofiju. Ovaj ekspijatorni spomenik ili spomenik umorstva podignut je u Sarajevu 28. juna 1917. godine na mjestu gdje se desio atentat, a sastojao se zapravo od 3 dijela, dakle komemorativne ploče od ljevanog željeza na cesti, zatim kamene klupe na desnoj strani Latinske ćuprije te arhitektonski i skulpturalno oblikovanog spomenika na lijevoj strani. Dakle, ovaj spomenik sadrži medaljon sa portretima nadvojvode i vojvodkinje, iznad njih su smještena ova dva stuba koji nose sarkofag i grbove, odnosno krune carske kuće, a u podnožju je još smještena i niša sa prikazom Pieta, dakle ona je često na fotografijama koje se reproduciraju odnosno sakrivena zbog vijenaca koji su bili postavljeni na to mjesto. Sad, odabir rješenja spomenika je bio u rukama zemaljskog poglavara baruna Stjepana Starkotića, dok je izrada nacrta i izvedba spomenika bila povjerena mađarskom arhitekti i nadporučniku Eugenu Boriju. Kako nas periodika izvještava, inicijativa za gradnju spomenika je potekla od vojnih krugova, a kod sakupljanja priloga za gradnju spomenika koje je išlo dosta teško, najveće zasluge su imali spomenuti Bori, te pripadnici klerikalnih krugova, ponajviše velečasni Anton Puntigam koji je dao u stvari posljednje pomazanje nadvojvodi i vojvodkinji. Ovaj spomenuti Puntigam je zdušno organizirao i prikupljanje priloga za još veći projekat koji je trebao komemorirati ubijene prijestolonasljednike, a riječ je o omladinskom Sofijinom domu i crkvi Franca Ferdinanda, koji su trebali služiti školskim ustanovama i vojnim posadama. Kako arhivskim podacima stoji, akcija je pod navodnicima bila zasnovana na katoličkom temelju te ju je odobrila zemaljska vlada, a time i carsko i kraljevsko ministarstvo financija. Bor je i za ovaj projekt izradio nacrt te u buduću crkvu koncipirao kao monumentalnu građevinu u romaničkom stilu, koja bi da je ishod rata bio drugačiji bila izgrađena na Kovačićima te bi dominirala tim dijelom grada. Dakle, oba ova Borijeva projekta, kako ovo realizirano spomeničko, tako je ovo nerealizirano kada je u pitanju crkva, sadrže sakralne elemente, a oni ih usko vezuju za katoličku crkvu i pored toga nose formalno stilska obilježja historicizma koja u svojoj retrogradnosti i masivnim i čvrstim formama nastoji sugerirati stabilnost i trajnost monarhije, čija snaga leži u sprezi dinastije, vojske i crkve. I kada je riječ o komemoriranju vojnika koji su dali život boreći se za domovinu i monarhiju, već je spomenuto da je sjećanje na njih indirektno bilo inkorporirano u figuralnim carskim spomenicima. Eksplicitnije se sjećanje na njih očitovalo u takozvanim ratnim spomenicima, kao što su ovdje prikazani Vitez u željezu, koje je pod pokroviteljstvom Sarkotića izrađeno u Beču, odnosno izradio ga je Franz Železni 1915. godine, kao i Bošnjak bojovnik koji je podignut u Ključu. Ovi kipovi bili su dosta skromnih dimenzija od umiruće glava, dakle monumentalne statue koje isto radio slovenački kipar Josip Urbanija 1916. i 1918. godine za vojno groblje na Koševu u Sarajevu. Poznato je da je motiv glava bio čest kod komemoriranja poginulih boraca u srednjoevropskom kontekstu, a porijeklo vuče još od spomenika kod Asperna iz 1858. godine. Za razliku od ovog spomenika koji je kroz 19. stoljeće postao gotovo simbol univerzalnog karaktera, statue bosanskih vojnika su bile specifičnije jer su imale nacionalna obilježja koja se mogu iščitati iz njihove uniforme. I slično bi se moglo reći za skice, slično bi se moglo reći i za skice ratnih spomenika koji su bili predviđeni za Bihać i Maglaj, a čuvaju se u arhivu Bosne i Hercegovine. Ovi su napravljeni u više varijanti i nepoznati autor ih je radio, a zanimljivi su jer sadrže elemente islamske arhitekture kojim se trebao podcrtati vjerski identitet poginulih boraca. Koliko je poznato, oni nisu nikada izrađeni, a među nerealizirane zamisli o izgradnji ratnih spomenika treba uvrstiti ideje bečkog arhitekta Hansa Bergera, koji je u časopisu Bautechniker 1917. godine iznio nekoliko prijedloga o lokaciji i izgledu jednog postratnog memorijala. Uzimajući u obzir prirodno okruženje Sarajeva te potrebu da se podigne monumentalni spomenik koji će biti upečatljiv, Berger je ponudio arhitektonska rješenja koja bi akcentirala brdske padine oko grada, a koje su u formalno-stilskom pogledu historicističkog karaktera i podsjećaju na vilhelminske spomenike. Dakle, evo za kraj, jedno od osnovnih pitanja vezani za spomenike se tiče njihove mogućnosti da kroz vizualnu formu sačuvaju sjećanje na određene događaje i osobe. Pitanje stila u tom kontekstu je naročito značajno, jer ne samo da pokazuje ukus vremena, već i sredstva kojima se vladajuće strukture koriste da bi iskazale vlastite vrijednosti i htjenja. Može se u konačnici reći da su se spomenici podignuti u Bosni i Hercegovini nakon 1914. godine uobličavali u akademskom i historicističkom izrazu kao reprezentima ukusa vladajućih i vojnih struktura, a kojima se nastojala iskazati lojalnost kući Habsburgovaca. Figuralna plastika nije izostajala više radi obzira prema domaćem puku, već je štaviše poslužila radi demarkacije imperijalnog prostora te afirmacije onih identiteta koji su bili bliski režimu. Koliko su ti identiteti bili krhki, isključivi, to jest složeni i promjenjivi, možda najbolje govori činjenica da je većina njih nakon rata i uklonjena. Zahvaljujem na pažnji.
Hvala lijepo. Now Petra Zvolčak, our last speaker of this panel, will speak about the Slovenian remembrance of World War I. So the floor is yours, and don't forget to introduce yourself first.
Thank you very much. So I'm coming from Ljubljana, from the Historical Institute of the Scientific Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. Well, at the moment I'm also the head of this institute, and I'm dealing for the whole of my professional life, I won't say how long it is, with the First World War. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Nova Gorica, and I will tell you something about my another function, but not because of it, but because of the fact that Slovenia has funded a national committee that for the commemoration of the centenaries of the First World War, and I'm a vice president of this committee, and I hope that well, I have to leave Sarajevo earlier because of this new state duties, the opening of the Central Slovenian exhibition on Saturday in Ljubljana. So what about the Slovenian remembrance of the World War I? What shaped the Slovenian historical remembrance of the First World War? What were the agencies that directed the streams of the Slovenian remembrance flows? The position of the Slovenes at the outbreak of the First World War was rather diversified in terms of military participation, and especially an overall Slovenian war experience after the opening of the battlefield between Italy and Austria-Hungary, which also cut the Slovenian ethnic territory. The majority of Slovenes fought in the Austro-Hungarian army, and among 1.2 million fallen Austro-Hungarian soldiers, there are between 35 and 40,000 Slovenian soldiers out of 1.8 of the Slovenian population, which was then above the Austrian average. Some Slovenes were volunteers in the Serbian and Allied armies, and the Venetian Slovenes, who were the Italian citizens, fought in the Italian army. The end of the First World War undermined the foundations of the centuries-long existence of the Slovenian provinces after the safe patronage of the Habsburg crown. The turning point in the Slovenian history of the 20th century was thus the year 1918, with the establishment of the new Yugoslav state and the loss of a third of the Slovenian ethnic territory in the following 2 years. From the perspective of historical memorizing, including World War I, the ethnocentric model was introduced in contrast with the Austro-Hungarian idealistic concept of history and memory. Next important turning points were the Second World War and the Social Revolution that placed new demands in the context of historical remembrance, and the First Imperialistic War lost its state-building importance. The historical remembrance in the First Yugoslav state was put to a severe test by the very separating memories and situation between winners, liberators, unifiers, and on this other side, losers, liberated and unified, which marked the course of historical remembrance of the Great War, as there was not possible to celebrate victory and defeat at the same time. The latter did not mark the Slovenian remembrance to the same extent as it influenced the position of the Slovenian World War I experience in the state-building Yugoslav memorization of the Great War. The Yugoslav state's new historical conception and its World War I mythology, based on the Yugoslavism, referred to a minority of the Slovenes. This is the Slovenian volunteers who had served in the Serbian or Allied armies during the war and had fought for the first Yugoslav state. The Slovenian historical remembrance of the First World War was for many decades based exclusively on the memorial literature as well as on the position of the commemoration of the victims of the war that was above all materialized through a central state memorial dedicated to the fallen soldiers. The memorial literature clearly reflects the state-building memorization preferences that had to support the Central Yugoslav political course and create a common Yugoslav culture and united memory of the historical events. The mainstream of the interwar Yugoslav war remembrance evolved around the thematization of the Serbian war effort and the withdrawal of the Serbian army with the king and the government along the Albanian mountains to the island of Corfu, as well as the Yugoslav volunteer movement. The latter became the most popularized war theme also in the Slovenian part of the Yugoslav kingdom. Although the Slovenian volunteer movement could perfectly fit into the Yugoslav remembrance frame, their actually military role was in fact very modest, though it should have mattered in terms of their symbolic effort in making the first Yugoslavia. But the unsuccessful attempts of the volunteer veterans to become an active part of the Yugoslav historical remembrance demonstrate the double standards in the handling of public memory of World War I in the first Yugoslavia. Well, after the 1945, the volunteers movement, just like many other World War I themes, withdrew from the public memory, with an exception of an attempt to partly configure the movement to the needs of the socialist revolution and managed to adapt to the new political course. A very similar development could be observed researching the thematization and remembrance of the military uprisings of the Slovenian regiments in May 1918. These military uprisings were the result of deteriorating conditions of the Austro-Hungarian army and were mostly led by the returnees from the Russian captivity, where they experienced the Russian revolutions, which ended the war and made it possible to the soldiers to return home, where they had the Slovenian soldiers and many others Austro-Hungarian soldiers. They had to rejoin the army and combat in the last Austro-Hungarian offensives on the Italian front. The idea of the end of the war was then associated to the Bolshevist propaganda and thus condemned by the Austrian authorities. The remembrance of the uprisings was interpreted in the first Yugoslavia as an important turning point in the movement toward the creation of the new state, as they aided to the disintegration of the Habsburg monarchy. After 1945, a special emphasis was put on the so-called Red Uprising of the Austro-Hungarian Marines in Boka Kotorska in January 1918, indeed influenced by the Bolshevist ideas. The uprisings in Austro-Hungarian army focused on the revolutionary ideas associated particularly to the idea of ending the war by means of a revolutionary act, which was the central driving force of the leaders of the uprisings, all violently suppressed. The political use or abuse of the matter could thus be traced in official historiography of the Second Yugoslavia. In the 1920s and in the 1930s, a series of memories of war captivity was published, describing the turbulent and difficult captivity of Slovenian soldiers of Austro-Hungarian army in Russia. On the other hand, these are very vivid accounts of the PO's experience, and above all, they represent a virtual encyclopedic description and travel books of what they have lived, whom they had met, the many different Russian people, languages, traditions, religions. Many POs returned from Russia after the war and were under suspicion of the new Yugoslav and also Slovenian authorities because they returned from revolutionary Bolshevik Russia, maybe also affected by Bolsheviks, thus their adaptation to a new political, social, even cultural environment was very difficult. A very interesting issue of the First World War Slovenian remembers is represented by the memory of Socha Isonzo Front, which was the result of the negotiations between Italy and the intent concluded by the London Treaty in April 1915 and Italian entrance in war in May 1915. Although some of the most striking and powerful memories and newspaper articles on the Socha Front had been published in the period of the First Yugoslavia, these had been just isolated occurrences without any public, even less official governmental interest. Why did the Slovenian Front, as we used to call it, the Socha Front, remain in the shadow of interwar Yugoslav remembrance of the Great War, although the war on the front practically involved the whole Slovenian territory and turned upside down the everyday life of each and every inhabitant of the Slovenian lands? The Socha Front was certainly not a Yugoslav-making front, although there had been attempts to organize a volunteer movement in the Italian front as well. The Yugoslav Committee decided to support the Yugoslav volunteers in the Serbian army because the Kingdom of Serbia did not want to compromise the relations with the new ally, although Italy was promised in the London Treaty the Austro-Hungarian territories that could have become a part of new Yugoslav state. This is the littoral, inhabited by the Slovenes and Croats, parts of Slovenian territory and some Croat island, among other things promised to Italy. The post-war fate of the above-mentioned territories, the Italian occupation immediately after the war, and the annexation of after the Treaty of Rapallo in 1920 laid a heavy burden on the memorization of the war on Socha. Due to Italian oppression, no public memory was permitted on these territories, not even the unveiling of the memorial plaques or monuments to the fallen Slovenian soldiers coming from this territory. On the other hand, the Italian government raised up monumental ossuaries along the whole former front, thus 3 also along the Socha River in Kobarid, now in Slovenia, Oslavje near Gorica, Gorizia, Görz, with a very dense Slovenian population, and the biggest in Redipulja. If this could be a reasonable explanation for the absence of public memory, including printing memoirs and other writings, as until 1928 the use of any form of Slovene was prohibited by the fascist regime, and the withdrawal to the private and intimate sphere, the problem of non-memorization and the absence of thematization of the Slovenian front remains unanswered. Now, even the Slovenian veterans who fought on the Socha front wanted to write down their testimonies, and only after many decades, after 1980s, many memories have been issued, many written from the point of view of a soldier than that of a Slovenian soldier fighting on the Socha front. They usually do not display moral hesitations about serving in the, as it was usually interpreted in the 7 decades long Yugoslav period, foreign army. Anyway, the Slovenian soldiers had performed their military duties, bearing in mind also the fact that they had defended their home yards, with the exception of some desertions of a military unit of Lieutenant Ljudevit Pivko to the Italian side, where he tried to gather the South Slav volunteers to fight against Austria-Hungary, and some isolated cases in which the deserters had chosen, as like Piłko, a lesser evil. But Piłko's post-war faith clearly reflected the actual political environment in the new Yugoslav state. Piłko was seen as a traitor, and he was not acknowledged the status of a volunteer, as he acted against the decision of the Yugoslav Committee on the organization of Yugoslav volunteers exclusively in the Serbian army. Thus, the struggle for public memory and recognition of the sacrificing effort of the Slovene soldiers during World War I, during the first Yugoslavia, was taken over by the Slovenian veteran organization, who had to convince the Serbian and Montenegrin comrades, whose war was crowned with victory, as John Horn put it, that their war experience should not have been neglected by defeat, but acknowledged as well. In the interwar Yugoslavia, the inter-allied victory culture was certainly prominent, but in terms of position of veterans, it was also potentially exclusionary. Some Serbian and Yugoslav veteran associations were aware of the gap between the victors and the vanquished and tried to incorporate the Austro-Hungarian veterans into its ranks, but they were also repeatedly reminded by the Italian comrades of the fact that many South Slavs, especially Croats, fought against Entente interests during the war. The reconciliation amongst former enemies was not only the central issue of the international veteran movement, but an important domestic concern. And despite many attempts of the reconciliation, the fact remains that the central figure of the pro-Serbian volunteer was also the most powerful symbol of culture of victory, which was the case in many Eastern European, the Habsburg successor states. They gained heroic attributions as they had fought for a virtual army of a non-existing national state and played a crucial role in forging the united Yugoslav national identity. The principal activity of Slovenian war veterans was thus concerned around the economic issues of the veterans, war invalids and war widows. Their dedication to the memory of their fallen comrades resulted in more than 160 memorials and memorial plaques all over Slovenian territory, with the exception of the territory annexed to the Kingdom of Italy. But they were unable to ensure a public commemorative place, a central Slovenian memorial or a monument to the unknown soldier, promoted and somehow adopted by the Slovenian political hierarchy, whose actual political powerlessness reflected also in inability to provide the necessary funds for such a monument. On the other hand, the Avala Memorial was constructed as the last attempt of Yugoslav government and the king to confirm the Yugoslav identity and unity, which could not allow the separate tribal or national, Slovene, Croat, even Serb, remembrance of the past events. The end of the Second World War and the creation of socialist Yugoslavia altered the Slovenian as well as Yugoslav narration of the First World War events and processes. Although the themes had not changed, the social revolution brought new perspective. The social revolutionary elements were introduced in the historical narrative practices, but what is more important, the First World War became a second-class remembrance theme, which did not fit well in neither in the concept of supranational martyrdom of the partisan liberation movement during World War II, nor in the concept of brotherhood and unity of the post-Second World War socialist Yugoslavia. Only after 1980s, new and an awakened public interest in World War I caused an increasing interest, producing many war memoirs, exhibitions, private museums, and a systematic and modern historical research. The central theme of the historical remembrance became the Socha Front, also by establishing the first Slovenian Museum of World War I in Kobarid. For some time, the memory of the Socha Front, somehow even colonized the Slovenian remembrance of the Great War, as the average Slovenian associates the Great War with the Socha front. Anyway, the decades-long Slovenian oblivion of the First World War came to an end quite simultaneously with the democratic changes and the Slovenian independence, which could be a mere coincidence. But the fact is that the historical remembrance was getting more introverted on one hand, but also conceptualized in a wider European perspective. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your paper and for all papers of this panel. I would like to open the floor for a discussion. So I would say we just raise your hand who has now a very urgent question. Okay, maybe we do it like that. So we have one question, answer, because we still have almost 1 hour to discuss. So who has the first question? Okay, we do it with the microphone, so just wait. And please, because it's a big conference and I do not know every one of you, just introduce you first, say your name and your affiliation, please, and then raise the question.
Svetlana Suveka, Moldova State University in Chisinau. I have a question to Ms. Bautic. It's about the fate of the monuments you presented. What is the fate of those monuments after the war, and how did they fit in this nation-state perspective? Thank you.
So, like I said, most of these monuments were removed from their original places.
I must have understood. I didn't hear. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, most of them were removed, and I actually thought they were destroyed because they didn't actually fit in that story about kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. And actually, they were not all of them were destroyed. Some of them were removed to Landesmuseum, National Museum, and recently some of them have been restored. So two of them, actually, the statue of Franz Josef is now in National Gallery in the entrance room, and the expiation monument, actually, the relief of Franz Ferdinand and his wife are also being restored. So they're displayed right now. Yeah, you can see them in National Gallery at this very moment, yeah.
Thanks.
I think there is a second question over there in the last
row. Nicola Moll, I'm a historian, but I have no affiliation, so I can't present any affiliation. Actually, I wanted to ask the same question, but perhaps just to Andrea, just to be a little bit more precise around that. So, was there any discussion, public discussion in the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes around these monuments when they were removed? And especially, I was wondering, because the line in the Kosovo cemetery is still there. Was there any discussion about this? Why is this monument basically still standing? Have you any explanations for this?
Okay, thank you. Well, when it comes to public discussion in Kingdom of Croats, Serbs, and Slovenes, I don't think there was any discussion, because the main goal was to commemorate Karađorđević family. So, imperial monuments to Franz Ferdinand or to Franz Josef didn't have really place. Instead, Gavrilo Princip was actually being commemorated in his deed. So, on the same spot where that expiation monument was erected, in that time was erected another commemorative plate saying that Gavrilo Princip on Vidovdan did heroic deeds. So that was the goal, to put this, the light on the other side. And what was the other question? I'm sorry. Kosovo, yeah.
Yes, the line.
Federal Commission for Preservation of Monuments decided to restore it in 2003, and I think that it was also not a matter of public discussion, but initiative of few people actually who worked in that preservation committee. Among them were some professors that work at Academy of Arts in Sarajevo, so that's there was actually no public discussion.
And is there any example of one monument which was transformed? Means which, one of the imperial monuments which was not removed but transformed into another kind of monument during the kingdom, or do you know any?
Do you mean on some specific?
No, it's just a question, because you said most of them were removed. So
yeah,
is there any one which was maintained but transformed to give it another signification?
Well, Lion Cemetery, because, you know, it was built for Austro-Hungarian army, but, you know, during and after World War II, it was partisan cemetery. So Lion itself didn't have any, you know, conflicting elements in itself. It was more universal symbol of fight and stuff like that. So, yeah, that would be.
May I add something? Because yesterday I was at this lion, and it's not only the lion, but there is one commemoration plate which reminds of one regiment. So was it replaced during the Yugoslav era and then replaced again?
I'm sorry, but I don't really know about that. In particular, commemorative plate, what happened?
Yeah, it's really small, and if you're not really going into deep, you don't see it. But it's about a regiment and the honor of occupation of Bosnia.
Yeah, well, still we have a discussion going on whether the Franz Ferdinand monument should be replaced on its original place. For some people, it's, you know, the occupier, and it has nothing to do in Sarajevo. For others, Gavrilo Princip footsteps should be replaced, put back on the same spot. So, you know, it's still open to discussion, and you can always see the shifting ideas or ideologies that, you know, can appropriate one monument or dismantle it or remove it.
So I think sometimes it's really hard for a historian to understand why something remains. So not why it is replaced, that's much easier, but the hard way is to find out sometimes why it's still there.
Sometimes it's hard even to understand why was something being built, because I didn't mention it, but Ivan Rendić, one of the most significant sculptors in Croatia, was commissioned to build Franz Josef monument in Bosanski Petrovac, and he did that. Actually, he made a plan for it, but with the idea that the monument will be soon replaced with some other bust or a statue. And he also complained that the city authorities who asked him to do that, in the end didn't pay him for the job done. So you can see how people can change their minds in a short time.
Thank you very much. Nicola, do you have one more question? Okay. And oh, great. Well, 3 hands. Yeah, we will start to discuss, and we have still 45 minutes. Okay, it's up to you.
Dobar dan, Sonja Dujmović, Institut za istoriju. Pošto sam ja bila brža, ja sam uzela mikrofon, a mislim da jednostavno zbog odgovora ovo koje je prethodni kolega postavio, a to je oko spomenika. Htjela sam samo reći da je iz naše perspektive princip bio slavljen za vrijeme kraljevine SHS u onoj mjeri u kojoj mi smo očekivali. Međutim, revolucionarnost dijela nije bio omiljena tema uopšte u kraljevini SHS. Njegovu, kako bi rekla, ostavštinu, Gavrilovu ostavštinu su stvari preuzeli Sokoli i oni su prvi koji su u stvari preuzeli dan, ali ne Vidovdan kao svoj dan koji će slaviti, nego dan kada su ubijeni mladobosanci, oni koji su bili punoljetni, znači 3. februar. To je bilo, a treba naglasiti da je ploča Gavrilo Principa u stvari da je ona podignuta tek 1930. godine. Znači, on se počeo vrlo kasno obilježavati i ono što je za državnu strukturu kraljevine SHS, taj čin Gavrilov nije bio baš povoljan, jer je on u svojoj, dakle, ideološkoj potki imao tu revolucionarnost, smjenu vlasti i, dakle, on nije bio omiljena tema, niti je on bio prihvatan od svih struktura, čak ni srpskog korpusa, nego samo od pjesnika, intelektualaca i omladine. Dakle, oni koji su išli odozdo, dakle, takozvanih nižih klasa. A htjela sam još nešto reći, ali sad sam u momentu oko hajke, oko toga takozvanog, jel tako, dijaloga javnog, da li da se ukloni spomenik Francu Ferdinandu. Najglasniji su naravno bili što se tiče Sarajeva, govorimo o Sarajevu, glasnik radikalne stranke Srpska riječ, koja je pokrenuta marta 1919. godine, i u onom smislu u kojem je su htjeli da uklone ćirilične natpise, ne znam, činovnike iz uprave koji su govorili njemački i tako dalje. U tom smislu je bilo, napokon je uklonut, treba ukloniti spomenik, treba natpis ukloniti. Tako da je s te strane, ako to možemo nazvati nekom javnom glašću, nekim dijalogom javnim, onda oni jesu poticali uklanjanje tog spomenika i kao, jel tako, pozdravili gromoglasno. Hvala vam, izvinite na brzini moju.
Ako smijem, ja bih zahvalila na ovim komentarima. Naravno, evo, Gavrilo Princip...
I da izrazim zadovoljstvo što je Renata Jambršić-Kirin ovdje u Sarajevu i da uvijek uživamo kad ona ima nešto da kaže nam.
Dakle, ovo što se tiče Gavrila Principa, ja možda nisam bila jasna, nisam ni rekla da je baš od političkog vrha iz Srbije sad došlo da se to mora skloniti. Međutim, mislim da imperijalni spomenici podignuti Habsburgovcima nisu mogli se naći na istom prostoru u kojem vladaju Karađorđevići, ali činjenica jeste da u stvari Gavrilo Princip je daleko više bio slavljen nakon Drugog svjetskog rata. I upravo zbog toga se tada, 45. pa do 53. kada je otvoren taj muzej Mlade Bosne, zapravo radi na isticanju njegovog tog herojskog čina, u smislu da on je bio jedan od onih potlačenih, običnih ljudi koji su se uspjeli usprotiviti jačem, nadmoćnom neprijatelju i pobijediti ga. Taj narativ se mogao jako dobro uklopiti u ovu priču nakon Drugog svjetskog rata, i zato evo i taj spomenik, te Principove stope koje nisu baš mnogima najjasnije, zapravo upravo su jedan vid konceptualnog spomenika gdje bilo ko može stati na te stope i zapitati se, odnosno naći se na mjestu tog Gavrila Principa, zapitati se da li je on heroj ili možda nije. Uglavnom u tom kontekstu se o to može razmišljati.
So thank you very much. We have a lot more questions. So I saw one here. Philip Hamershak, please.
Philip Hamershak, Zagreb Faculty of Law. I would like to pose two questions and perhaps try one comparison with monuments in Croatia. My first question, so were some of the monuments destroyed in the very first days of the fall of the monarchy by the mob, by the angry mob, or was it waited for some sort of official action?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't found any information on that, whether they were destroyed.
Okay, and another question is, was there any monuments erected after the war to the fallen soldiers here in Bosnia?
Well, actually, Bojana Page, who actually wrote a paper on commemorative practices in ex-Yugoslavia, said that those sites like Bosnia, Croatia, where people fought for Austro-Hungary, didn't really erect any monuments to fallen soldiers because they were fighting, Serbia. But I know about one monument being built in Doboj to those who were killed, for those Serbs who were killed during the war. That's what I know about.
Okay, now the comparison. Yeah. So, of course, all the imperial monuments in Croatia, as far as you know, were destroyed. They don't exist anymore. There is no monument to any Habsburg member of Habsburg monarchy. But there were some monuments erected, for instance, by the Jewish community that have survived. Liliana here will make a presentation later. And perhaps the most curious thing is that in 1939 there was erected a monument at Zagreb Mirogoj Cemetery, Central Cemetery of Zagreb, dedicated to the fallen soldiers of all sides. In fact, it was not directly dedicated, but there was no inscription on it. No, but it was known that it was to the fallen soldiers, and it presented like a Pietà statue of a dying young man in arms of his mother, without any military uniform or decoration or else. The monument did survive to this day, and it is one of these changed monuments, because in 1994 Zagreb association, civil association that tried to some actions in a way of memory. They put the inscription dedicated to the fallen Croatian soldiers, Croatian soldiers fallen in the First War, and that stated that this was the original inscription as put in 1939. As far as archival evidence tells us, there was no inscription, and in fact, and this is a fact that was forgotten for all these years, this is a monument over the ossuary containing 3,300 soldiers that died in Zagreb hospitals, the soldiers belonging to the all sides. So Austrians, Hungarians, Croatians fighting in Austrian-Hungarian army, Serb prisoners of war, even Romanians, and so on. So there was a monument in Zagreb built during the first Yugoslavia, but not dedicated, not directly, but indirectly dedicated to all the fallen soldiers. So and there are also some small monuments on several Dalmatian islands dedicated to the Dalmatian soldiers fallen in the First World War that have survived all the way from the First World War till now, and of course they don't contain any. They didn't contain any Habsburg
insignia,
politic inscriptions. One is interesting in a way. It was probably modified because it is a monument dedicated to fallen soldiers of that little community, island community. The first year is 1914, the starting year of the First World War, and the last year is 1921, the year that Italian occupation had finished. So it was a kind of 7-year war. So this it was very interesting to me, and we in Croatia, in fact, are every day prepared to find some new forgotten monument. So thank you.
Do you want to add something?
No, I was just, I wanted to say that I know about this practice of commemorating all soldiers in maybe France, Germany, etc. Actually, Douaumont, Verdun, those are the places where all of the soldiers were commemorated because they died there, and there is a big ossuarian monument dedicated to them. I don't know about any in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but who knows, maybe we will excavate something in the near future.
To a degree, it was a practical need, because during the war, all the soldiers were buried in individual graves. And after the 20 years had passed, the city and the graveyard authorities were faced with the decision either to destroy these graves because nobody was paying the rent, or to put them in one. So it was a mixture, an unclear mixture of idealistic, commemorative and so on, and financial motives.
Maybe we should leave it like that and save some important points for the discussion during the break. But what I think, for a person as I am, who never did research on remembrance and commemoration, what I find so fascinating when go to courtyards, graveyards. It's not official commemoration plates, but what really survived in many, many times are the normal graves where you still can see who lived and worked there, and you can see really they were proud of their count card titles and so on. And many of them are still there. So what I found fascinating is there you can still, beside any official commemoration, see that who lived there, who worked there. But I have a question for Renate, because the last years I've worked on, for example, the state of emergency in Austria-Hungary and occupation, and what I find so fascinating is always to have a focus on, was there a different home front, a different Hungarian, Austrian and Bosnian home front? And for the Croat case and the Croat women, it's interesting if there had been some kind of Hungarian Croat women, Austrian Croat women, and Bosnian Croat women, and if there had been any differences.
Actually, I haven't researched this particular topic, but as far as I know, all those women organizations who were very active during the First World War, actually all political parties and all political NGOs or associations were actually forbidden, except those with humanitarian goals. And there were a lot of women organizations, and it must be also mentioned that a significant part of their activities was collection of money for building those first memorials, even in Herzegovina, in other places, not only in Croatian part of the empire. So women were assigned as vestals to care about remembrance.
So they work together
even during
borders.
the war,
Okay.
and some of their actions, and even those humanitarian actions in the favor of the starving children in Herzegovina, and some actions for refugees, so to say, and war orphans from Istria. So there were a lot of transnationally oriented action.
So I always ask myself, for example, when they beg for money inside the administration or for the ministry, if you're a woman working in Croatia, in Hungarian Croatia, then you have to beg for money in Budapest, and the other ones in Austria. I have no idea, but does this happen, or did they work all closely together and ask everyone for help or financial support?
I really don't know, because I'm not a historian, so not familiar with historical documents about the connections.
But it's interesting that in your sources it does not make any difference.
For me, culture texts have no borders, so to say.
Good. Very interesting, thank you. Yeah?
Because the Slovenian experience is rather the same as Croatian. This, let's say, the Slovenian women, the mobilization of the home front was fit perfectly in the Austrian home front, let's say, the Austrian women, Austrian child, those frames that Austrian authorities somehow built for this, let's say, women participation in the war. But it changes in 1917 with the gathering of the Austrian Parliament, and the May Declaration that declares that the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs of the Habsburg Empire would like to live in their own third part, always under the Habsburg crown. The Slovenian women begin to put forward also political demands. So this is a slight change in the politicization of the, let's say, the women the women, not movement but activities during the First World War, and then they just make pressure also on the Slovenian political authorities. Just to mention, the Slovenian women had gathered 2,100 signatures for this May Declaration, and this was really a hard task to do, but they somehow won this let's say this battle for the political rights. So.
Thank you very much, and we have 2 more questions. I see. Please go for. Where is the microphone? 3 more questions. We start with you, and then you on the right. And
okay, Todor Chaparvanov, professor of the University Goce Delchev from Štip. I have a question for Andrea and Petra. What about today's situation? Do you still commemorate something from the First World War? Do you have some state commemoration, as the British and French did every year for this? Because we have in Macedonia this case when one occupiers came, they destroyed everything which the others built before them. And in Macedonia we have graveyards for all the armies who fought on the Macedonian soil. For example, German graves, French, British, Bulgarian, Serbian, but we have no Macedonian graves because Macedonians fought in the armies of all these Balkan states. And my question is why you don't celebrate something today, for example, in Bosnia? For example, why we want, because today we are in democratic states, and as you said, you have a lot of monuments which are built in the period after the First World War. Okay, in the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia it changed, but why not today? We cannot erase this for our memory, that it's happened sometimes in the history, you know, and the question is if we are trying to erase something, we are doing something to the history. It's not a real history. We cannot forget that, for example, the Macedonians are under the Bulgarians, under the Serbs. For example, the Bosnia and Herzegovina was annexed by the Austro-Hungary. And what about this? For example, the monument of Gavrilo Princip and this. What about today?
Excuse me. Many historians agree that actually memory as identity are categories that are not fixed, and they can be changeable according to a specific time. So actually we choose what to remember and what to forget. So I think that the monuments, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Balkans, show that remembrance is changeable. And monuments that are destroyed or erected or transformed actually prove that fact. Of course, it's 100 years from the beginning of the First World War, and now we remember that. But I think that in previous eras, focus was more on World War II, because it was more important for Bosnia and Herzegovina, the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Yugoslavia, etc. When it comes to nowadays, we don't have any more state, let's say, ideology that will commemorate this or that event. For example, anti-fascist organizations in Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Republika Srpska, they don't commemorate the same events on the same day. So you can say there's no state politics on commemorating at all. So that's the problem. Lack of state, politics in that matter are the one to blame, is the one to blame for lack of commemorating World War I or World War II. So, and I don't think that in our schools children do learn as much as they do in France or Germany about World War I. So I think that the focus is not on that, on that level. I don't know if I have answered your question. I don't know, that's maybe a question for historians than art historian that I am. So
we have 2 more questions here on the right. So yeah, pick up the micro.
I'm Melissa Bakavoy from the University of New Mexico, and first I want to thank you for your splendid papers. I like the mix of the interdisciplinary panel. I mean, it gives us fabulous kind of comparisons about this issue, of course, of social memory, and that I won't make a comment. I have questions for each of you, and Renata, that I'm very interested in the use of photographs and how they're deployed actually at the time that they first appear and then kind of throughout the interwar period. And I was just wondering if you've done any work looking at various photographic albums or calendars that are published actually in Croatia that often kind of return to both the imperial period as well as perhaps the wartime itself, and that might be through veterans organizations or, Hrvatska Žena, which was a very important organization in terms of kind of building certain types of, having commemorative ceremonies and building monuments as well. So that's my question to you and Andrea, that what I'm interested in always is actually peasant culture. Right, and that one of the things when you look at monuments, right, and this is again where photographs become incredibly important, because that you have photographic evidence of the monuments that are erected immediately, right, for the war dead, not 10, 15, 20 years later. And that I found that photographic evidence, particularly along the Salonika front, has been very important to tell me about, traditions and this notion truly of mourning as opposed to memorialization, right? I mean, how was this practiced by the men who actually had just experienced a particular battle, okay? And then Petra, nice to see you again. You said that you've cataloged about 160 different types of either memorial plaques, fountains, and the like, and I would like for you to kind of talk a little bit more about those, and who were the various organizations or peoples, because I know you know this, right, that sponsored these, and what this meant really to kind of local communities and the people who had lost loved ones. So thank you.
Mogu ja započeti iskoristiti prisutnost prevoditeljice. Ja sam htjela u svom izlaganju s jedne strane upozoriti dakle na pojavu novih tehnologija, mislim fotografija koja nije bila nova, ali je postala dostupna dakle velikom broju vojnika, a osobito naravno ovih iz viših komandnih struktura ili oficirima, i taj val komodifikacije, da tako kažem, katastrofe, dakle pojavu ilustriranih magazina, fotografije, razglednice i posteri kao takvi koji su apsolutno željeli apelirati na podsvjesni, da tako kažem, dio recipijenata. Dakle, tu su se oni s jedne strane odvojili, a s druge naslonili na ovu religijsku tradiciju. Dakle, važnost jakih vizualnih simbola, dakle, mogućnost identifikacije, to su, dakle, vrlo jasni simboli i kao što je primjer ovih živih slika, ali tableau vivant, spuštanje, dakle, jednog ne komemorativnog, nego rituala koji je vezan, dakle, uz reprezentaciju vlasti iz visokih, elitnih u niže slojeve. Tako da mislim da tu ima stvarno mnoštvo materijala. A druga stvar, to su karikature i montaža. Dakle, ovo što je Karl Kraus započeo i što u Hrvatskoj možemo naći osobito u magazinu Ilustrovani list, to je dakle taj pokušaj da se uz pomoć suponiranja, dakle, različitih istina, da tako kažem, ili različitih strana, dakle, tog rata s jednog strane krajnje brutalnosti, krajnje destrukcije, krajnog raščovječenja, a sa druge ovih patriotskih ideja o velikom, slavnom i herojskom ratu, da se to nekako pomiri. I to je recimo fantastično vidljivo u tom ilustrovanom magazinu 917. i 18. kad odjednom je dakle jasno da je kraj došao monarhiji, ali još uvijek, dakle do zadnjeg Božića imamo, dakle s jedne strane sliku ove kraljevske obitelji, kako ona slavi Božić, i s druge strane, dakle, fotografije ove hercegovačke djece koje su stvarno kao fotografije iz logora, iz Drugog svjetskog rata. Dakle, potpuno. A onda komentari apsolutno, dakle, nisu i politička, da tako kažem, arbitraža tu nije bila moguća, nego slike su opet te koje, dakle, jednostavnim suponiranjem jedne i druge stvarnosti ili ove službene istine i ona koja će doći već sutra, nadomještaju, dakle, mogućnost ove političke artikulacije i snalaženja, da tako kažem, u tom vremenu. Jer, mislim, moramo biti svjesni da je bio niz novina drugih političkih stranaka, ovih opozicionara, ali da je vojna cenzura bila aktivna i da je stvarno velik dio tih članaka u tim novinama bio cenzuriran. Ali, mislim, svi ovi ozbiljni, da tako kažem, političke novine, prije svega nisu imale ilustracije. Dakle, zato je taj fenomen meni. Mislim, naravno da sam pregledala sve albume iz Prvog svjetskog rata u Hrvatskom državnom arhivu. Ima ih, ali apsolutno velik dio građe, dakle, nestao, još uvijek se ne zna gdje je. Ali mi je apsolutno nevjerojatno da postoje tako dragocjeni materijali još uvijek i u privatnom posjedu. Kao što je ovaj moj kolega je bio sa mnom na znanstvenom skupu u Hrvatskom državnom arhivu prije mjesec dana i onda mi je rekao, pa ja imam od svog djeda, i stvarno kad mi je poslao, to su, kao što ste vidjeli, sjajni tehnički i sadržajno materijali koji bi trebali se naći u arhivu. Ali sad je to druga priča o našim državnim institucijama i tom, dakle, stalnom nepovjerenju ljudi u institucije koje bi trebale brinuti o nacionalno važnim temama i uspomenama.
Okay, I'm not sure I really understood your question. Was it about peasant culture or...
Well, it comes to the focus many times when we talk about monuments or those which are... Oh, gosh. I'm sorry. Many times when we talk about monuments, right, is that it is those which are built by, we can say local elites or national elites, right? Mm-hmm. But there are those that are put up by the men themselves along the various fronts. Mm-hmm. And I was just and a really good historical source for those often are photographs. So we're back to photographs. I was just wondering if you've come across any of those. I mean, as I say, I have many from along the Salonika front. So, for example, that you might see a headstone that will have etched into it just a short poem or something like that refers to, in this case, was referring to returning to Serbia, all right, along that front. And I was just wondering, along the Drina, if there was anything like that or any type of photographic evidence, because obviously that it's very difficult because those disappear, right? They become weather-worn. They eventually become collected into larger ossuaries or the like.
So most of the photographs I found, I actually presented to you. So I would say that I didn't find many in the archives I've explored, etc. But I do agree with you that the photographs are really, really important. And when it comes to peasant culture, I need to say that I didn't really, explore in that area, because when talking about monuments, you actually talk about bourgeois culture and imperial culture. So I don't think that peasants were actually involved in that story. So yeah, that's one of the biggest problems about monuments, because they don't really show the real state or the opinion of people, peasant people, or however you wish to call them, but the highest ranked people who are close to royal families or government, etc. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. So regarding the Slovenian, Slovenian monuments, the monuments were a kind of result of cooperation between the local communities and the veteran organization, the League of Combatants. which mostly raised money, whereas the local community erased the monument, put the inscription. The most usual inscription was that to the fallen soldiers, 1914, 1918. There was no motherland, no fatherland. Is somehow neutral for the Austro-Hungarian period and somehow fitting in this new Yugoslav frame. And what is very interesting, well, they were put mostly at the civil cemeteries, the center of the civil cemeteries in these local communities. 1/3 maybe of these monuments were put in the center, in the central square of a village of the city. Well, the big cities don't have really their central monuments, and we can find the inscriptions that all the fallen soldiers from that community are named. And this is a very good source for a historian, and you can also see this social impact, because let's say the members of one family had fallen, well, 3 fathers with 2 sons. So this is really a hard work, let's say, for a historian to do, but we always have to compare these sources with other archival sources. And there is what is interesting in the Slovenian case, that somehow this veteran organization tried to, as I have mentioned, tried to erase the central monument, but it didn't work out. And the place that this central monument should had been put was the central cemetery of Ljubljana, the Žale cemetery, where the dead fallen, not really fallen, dead soldiers were buried during the whole period of the war, the POs that somehow were gathered in Ljubljana. And there was, and still is, a big Italian war cemetery, 1915, 1918, or 17, where the Italian POs are buried. But there was no Slovenian, let's say, monument. So the Ljubljana authorities, not the state authorities, but the city authorities, somehow decided, the municipal of Ljubljana, to build an ossuary, a big, small ossuary with a statue of the unknown soldier, which we call the Krniolan Janez, the Kranjski Janez, which was the denomination of the Slovenian soldiers during the war. And this was a kind of let's say, compromise between the veteran organization with their wishes and what could really been done during the first Yugoslavia. And when you ask about the central state commemoration, well, Slovenia is going to have a central state commemoration at the place of Žale, the cemetery of Žale, and this commemoration would be dedicated to all who died during the First World War, the military and civilian victims of the First World War, regardless of their nationality and of the site that they fought in. And this will happen on the 9th of September. This is some PR 2014. Thank you very much.
I can't remember the writer, but I'm sure he worked for the Count K. Kriegspressequartier, this war propaganda literature office. But he wrote when experiencing the occupied part of Serbia, and he said, well, if the Germans conquered a town and you went into this town only 12 hours later, it's always like that they already erected some kind of monument made of wood or by collected shells and so on. But the Austrians did the same, and I think it's what you also said, with this small commemoration of the regiment fought here and to identify themselves with this war experience and occupation experience. But what I found really interesting is that the Austro-Hungarian army was not really, I would say they already forbade to do this, because they said, it's only an order I found, and I never ever came across this discussion again, but they said, well, it's an occupied country, and we should not leave too many stuff which says it's our country or we conquered it. So they were not interested in that. But still, I think that's maybe it's some kind of urgent need for any soldier and to commemorate fighting comradeship or something like that, and to erect this. And what came into my mind when you talked about this at the Salonika front is the southwestern front in Italy, where you find it, you go hiking and you find it every 10 steps. These small, even if it's only IR-48, infantry regiment number, but it's still in the mind of the people, and it's still tradition of the Austrian army to go there and commemorate. So. Okay, I would say we have one more and last question, but just wait a second, because I was asked to tell you that the lunch will be at 1:30 and in the same room where the breakfast had taken place. So please raise the last question of our panel. And
okay, thank you. My name is Petar Todorov. I'm coming from Institute of National History from Skopje. I have two questions. First of all, thank you for very interesting presentations. My question is, my two questions actually related to Petra Spolčák presentation. I'm motivated to ask you because I see some similarities with a situation in Macedonia regarding historiography production and the way how World War I is remembered. So my first question is, what is the dominant narrative in the Slovenian historiography? Because sometimes you mention some terms that leads me to a conclusion that, okay, I might be wrong, leads me to a conclusion that you have also the myth of victimization, because you said some ethnic Slovenian territories divided, some Slovenians remained out of what was created after 1918. Slovenia as a part of Kingdom of Serb, Croats and Slovenes. So is this myth of victimization of dominant in the Slovenian historiography, or any other myth regarding which is a product of the national perspectives in historiographic production? And the second question is, but the first question, if you can give me like a definition of the situation in Slovenian historiography in 2-3 sentences. And the second question is there what are the current debates in new trends in the Slovenian historiography regarding the First World War? Does, for example, now the 100 years of the beginning of the First World War influence the Slovenian historians to work more and more on this topic and to challenge some previous findings by the elder historians? Thank you.
So thank you very much. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer as you would like me to do so, but regarding the first question, first I have to, well, when I talk about memorization or memory, I really talk about memoirs and memory, because the Slovenian historiography during the first, let's say the first Yugoslavia, because it's easier for me to say this way, the Slovenian historiography was developing the debates on the national movements in the 19th century, and it was very introverted into the Middle Ages, ancient history, and the then contemporary history did not really matter to the historians. And so the whole point, the whole memorization of what happened during the Great War was put aside. It was not a part of, let's say, the historical school, the Slovenian historical school, which developed then after the Second World War, and the First World War was really not even not the central. As I said, is what the second class theme. We had only one book, original, on the Slovenian decision to join the Yugoslav. This is the kind of free translation, but it was on the political life in Slovenian lands during the First World War and the outcome. So the unification with the Kingdom of Serbia. This was one historical book. We had one translation from Czech about the uprisings, and that's all. Till 1980s, as I can recall. And there were two books on the Isonzo front, Socha front, written by the non-historians. And this was the trend till 1980s. The non-historians wrote books about historical events, which is nothing bad. It's bad only for the historians, for the science that didn't interested itself in the Great War. In 1980s, in 1990s, the things have changed, and now I'm not really sure if I have answered the first question, but I'm coming to the second one. I don't want to, let's say, to make PR for myself, but I'm a good example of how these changes occurred in, let's say now we are talking about Slovenia as an independent state. In the 97, the Slovenian historical science has got the first PhD regarding the First World War, and that was, well, myself. And we still don't have a group of historians that would concentrate, like I do, only on the Great War. And I wish it's going to happen in next year. I have many colleagues switching from the Second to the First World War, and this is a good approach because they have this comparative approach to many problems, to many issues, but still, but there is a growing interest, not so much to the military events. We somehow leave the military events to the non-historians. And we do the research on occupations, everyday life, on the home front and on the battlefield, the roles of women, children front. So these are the social and cultural history of the Great War, and we put aside the military, even the Isonzo or Socha military battlefield. We leave it to to those who have somehow managed to make or revive this interest in the First World in the Great War during the 1980s, because there were, as I said, the non-historians and the collectors on the part of the previous battlefield. The collectors who collected the material, physical material from the front, made private collections, and from those private collections, this First World War Museum in Kobarid was erected. So this was this is a short, let's say, chronology of what happened.
I think we should end with this plea that we're still in urgent need for more research, which should be done, well, under scientific circumstances, interdisciplinary and cross borders. And I do not want to stand, I go and eat because all of us are hungry. And I clap for all of us.